I always dream about Cherry Grove as a gay Shangri-La.
We arrived at the dock, and I looked down and I saw all these beautiful men in Speedos and high heels. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven.
Cherry Grove was always the best kept secret in the whole gay world for decades and decades.
The first time I came to Cherry Grove was the summer of 1943. I wasn't born yet, but my mother came all that summer.
As a kid, I came over here. The family had property here it was the end of World War II, late 1944, 1945.
I first came here in 1951, maybe for a day or a weekend.
1954.
1955.
1956.
In the summer of 1957.
1957. I was 20 years old.
1958.
Probably in A58 or 59.
About 1961, 62, about 63.
I came in 1963, and I fell in love with it.
I came for my first visit in 1968.
The late 60s.
First time 1970. 1972. I was 17.
Early to mid-70s.
1977. 1977. I remember because that was the year after the bicentennial.
1982.
1983.
I believe that I first visited Cherry Grove in 1999.
In 2002.
I came the summer after 9/11.
2004. My first day trip was in 2005. And my first girlfriend brought me, and it was incredible and really eye-opening. I had just come out as gay, and it was really life-changing for me to arrive here.
One common story is that there were pirates on Cherry Grove.
Recently? Pirates recently? That would be fun.
Years ago.
I would imagine there could be.
Well, there used to be shipwrecks along the coast. And were there pirates? Possibly. Fire Island got its name by people that were shipwrecked here in the early days and would light fires on the Bay Coast to tell the people on the mainland that they were here and they were stranded.
They claim it was called Fire Island because the pirates would set fires on the island and lure the ships in and then murder the ships and steal the goods. That's one of the lures.
Charlie Dickerson was a World War I veteran, and he had a wonderful series of short stories. And one of the stories that he had was of Mr. Smith, who was supposedly here in the 1600s, who was a pirate and who lived someplace in this area of Fire Island. We don't know exactly where.
They say there is treasure on Fire Island. People through the years have come up with coins.
When I used to take my walks every morning, which I can't do anymore, but I would always be looking for a chest of coins or something, but never found it. And no one else has, as far as I know.
When there's fog at night, the pirates come into the meat rack out of the fog and murder people.
Have you ever seen one?
Yes, I did, but he didn't kill me.
In the old days, when there was no wagons and no people, and there were just people over here building, and I guess they would harvest hay over here and ship it off. I think that was one of the things that they did do. And in order to do that, they had to have horses to take the carts of hay to the boats. And there were a couple of guys over here who had brought a horse over on a barge, and the horse died, and they didn't know what to do with the horse, so they were just sitting around drinking quite a bit, wondering what to do with it, and they decided they better bury it. So they dig a hole and they bury the horse, but they didn't dig the hole deep enough, and the four legs are sticking up out of the earth, so these guys just sawed the legs off.
My grandparents first came to Cherry Grove like 1918, and it was very rural at the time, and they rented for 6 years, and they realized that they had discovered paradise. So they bought the property where my house is now, and we've been here ever since.
Sayville families built the original cottages and brought them over. And bought huge stretches of the community, the Duriers and the Greens and the Gerards, their family names, and they bought whole stretches from the bay to the ocean.
My aunt owned property here, and we came over to help her open up the houses and close up the houses. So as a little kid, it was mostly off-season. My jobs were to clean the chimneys because the kerosene was there was no electric. The only way of lighting at night was the kerosene. And so I cleaned the chimneys. I got to dig the garbage holes. Over here we had outside burning. The West End, if you dig in your yard, all of a sudden you'll hit crunch because you'll be hitting old rusty cans or whatnot, and things that were left over from back in the earlier days before we had garbage service.
When I first came here, we did not have electricity. We did not have running water. We had to pump water up to tanks on top of the house, and we'd all be at the beach. The first one home would have a hot shower, the rest of us would not.
I just find the fact that there was no electricity until the 60s very interesting. I can't imagine living without electricity. I can't imagine putting on a drag show with a generator in here in the community house. Can you imagine putting your makeup onto that? Mary, some of them are beasts as it is. Can you imagine without lights what they look like?
The fire department consisted of everyone. If there was a post with a big round ring on it, which was a railroad tie bent into a circle with a hammer hanging. And if there was a fire, you would ring this gong.
Living with my family, it was kind of touch and go. I was only like 23. So we would go out to Ocean Beach for the day and dance at the hotel. And then we moved to Ocean Bay, and I rented there for 2 years. I loved the whole idea of Fire Island.
I don't think I knew what it was. I think I knew that it was a queer community. And I was a kid from the South Bronx who knew I was gay, but didn't know what that meant.
It was just different than any place that I probably have ever been, and it was. I stayed with Dick Hall and Michael DeSantis, and I stayed there about 4 or 5 weekends, but I was a guest that never wanted to leave.
We'd find Captain Hawkins, who had keys to houses, and we'd get together and he'd find a house for us for $20 for the weekend. A lot of people stop using their houses in the summer, and that's when the rentals started. Next generation of the local people who inherited the houses began to sell them to the renters.
Maggie and I rented with Tom Holden and a bunch of the guys, and our share each for the whole summer starting in May through September was $125.
I met a guy, and he knew about Cherry Grove. I hadn't even heard of the place. So we came out here for a weekend, and we stayed at the hotel. And there was an awful lot of dancing in those days. There was nothing but men out here. You had one or two women, I think, but essentially it was nothing but a mass of young men in their 20s and 30s. And coming out here with a boyfriend was like going to a whorehouse with your wife.
Were women allowed to dance together?
No, no more than guys were.
So what was the policy?
The policy was then when the bartender whistled, or Duffy himself did, the women would quickly find a male partner and get up and dance. It was the same in the city.
Like up at the Ice Palace, they had a jukebox. But dancing, you had dance maybe 3 guys and 1 girl. There always had to be a girl in the dancing group. And if the cops came in, the lights went on. And right away it stopped, or you just stayed dancing with the girl.
I've been in the shows since 1955. It's 60 years on the calendar, but I've been performing for 61 years. This is my 61st season. It was very hard at the beginning because someone, I'm not even going to mention, called me the singing Jew. And then there weren't that many Jewish people out here then. But I bought my house early on anyway. But there was somebody who he owned a house on the ocean. He was very wealthy, big shot with people around him all the time. They came to the theater and I was in his show and they were sitting in the first row, and when I started to sing, they all put their newspapers up in front of their face. And I stopped the song and I ran across the stage and I grabbed the newspapers and I threw it at them, and the audience went wild, and then I started my song all over again.
Keep your Tweeties, I'll eat my Wheaties with an all-American boy. I'm hot for Adidas on an all-American boy.
When I was in high school, my best friend told me that he saw in a magazine a picture of 2 boys holding hands on a beach in a place called Cherry Grove, and I was very interested in that because I was gay and didn't know it, but I knew that I would be very comfortable and very at home in a place like that. So I went to the store where the magazines were, and sure enough, there was a picture of 2 boys on the beach in little bathing suits going to the water holding hands.
In the 60s, it was amazing because you just get people coming to Cherry Grove from all over the world, just to meet other gay people.
Hello Dolly was blaring out of all of the windows.
I had heard that it was a gay party town, but that was very free and promiscuous and fun.
To me, Fire Island was sex and booze. That was, to have as much liquor as I wanted, to have as much sex as I wanted, whenever I wanted it, was extraordinary.
I was scared shit of it, in plain English, because I heard this was an island of all gays, and it was sinful city, supposedly. You hear all these things.
What is the meat rack?
What is the meat rack?
Well, there's many ways you could describe the meat rack. Maybe the meat rack was a sex haven.
We'd all start getting prepared to go out to the rack about 10 o'clock. You do all sorts of cleansing and gargling, filing your fingernails, getting everything together, the poppers, the handkerchiefs, before you went out.
I don't think I can really say what the meat rack is because I have never been there.
There's a little path that goes through because people who want to go from the Grove to the Pines use this same trail.
Such little trails that people can go off and be alone. Some people prefer not to be alone. They like to show everything.
I don't like that term, and I never have. You know, it was like meat rack.
Before I came out, I heard the Ice Palace, and I thought it was like a freezer. And then I heard the meat rack, and I literally thought it was a place where they hung meat.
The meat rack's where we tell people who come to visit, don't go there unless you're looking for a homosexual experience.
It's like a circus. You see all different types of things going on.
It's known for having people that perform sexual acts. I think mostly at night, although I've caught a glimpse in the daytime.
When I first came in the 70s, it was the time of liberation, of course, and free sex.
When I was younger, I used to go to the Belvedere and walk up to the Belvedere, thinking I was going to the rack, and I wouldn't have the balls to pass the lions. I would turn around and go back home.
One Sunday morning, I came out of the house and there was a guy named Mitty Malleus. And I go, hi, Mitty, how's everything? How was the rack last night? Oh, May, you don't know what I went through. And I said, what? She says, there I was working on a nice big piece of meat and some dizzy queen went and pulled it out of my mouth. So I bit him on the hand. I said, he's probably dead by now with the poison in you. And later in the day, I met another friend, Daphne, and I said, Daphne, how was the meat rack last night? Oh, it's wonderful, but some dizzy bitch bit me. And I said, I think you better go to the doctor and get a shot.
We did go there once when we were living here in the winter, and it was the dead of winter. It was snow, the bay was frozen, there was snow on the ground, and we went into the meat rack expecting to find out what was there. It was a pretty wooded area, and we were amazed in January, there were a couple of men in there, just mind-boggling.
I know what it's like out here in the winter because I've been out here in the winter. Actually, Bobby and I spent several Christmases here. We always used to spend Thanksgiving, but when his mother was alive, we were taking care of her, so we had to go back. But we did spend a couple of Christmases here after that, and it was absolutely breathtaking, beautiful, and lovely. With no people, it was heaven, real heaven.
There was this whole myth that there was something called the donut rack.
Never.
So it didn't?
No.
I heard that there was a donut rack, and that, but I don't know if it was true or not. It certainly is a legend around here that there was.
I don't think that's true because I'm not a lesbian.
I heard about it also, and there were several women who would exchange partners after a party, but that was that.
The meat rack was on towards the Pines, and the donut rack was towards Sailor's Haven. That's where they said it was, but I don't believe it. And I don't remember, I mean, I remember the statements about it, but I don't think it ever happened.
Lesbians don't cruise publicly.
No, there was never a donut rack. There were maybe 24 lesbians in the place when we were there.
I had a lover who was trying to impress me. So they were having the bartender awards out here on Fire Island back in the day. They used to have bartenders awards every month, and they used to travel bar to bar and have these big parties. And it was here at the Ice Palace. So he rented a limousine and stocked with liquor and weed and all kinds of stuff. And we got in the limo and drove to Fire Island and went to the Pines by mistake. And back then, the taxi here on the island was in a dune buggy as opposed to boats. So we had to walk to the ocean and call a dune buggy and travel along this beautiful beach in the full moon. It was absolutely magical. And then we landed at the Cherry Grove and walked up into the Ice Palace to this massive drag show. It was just a night I'll never forget. It was just spectacular. And right away, I knew this was the place for me.
You know, drag shows were really non-existent anywhere else. And the people that came over to the shows, this place was mobbed. Even back in the early 60s, I worked at Pat's Restaurant for a while. And the people would come down from Ocean Beach and they'd all sit at a big table and they would keep saying, when are the boys coming in with their funny hats? And I would make up stories and I'd say, oh, they're not coming in tonight. There's a big party down at the other end of the beach. So nobody will be in tonight, because they would sit there for 2 or 3 hours waiting to see people that were stranger, I guess, than they'd ever seen.
There was that feeling that this was our place. And back then it was very important because we didn't have a place and we didn't feel like we fit in anywhere.
This was before the Stonewall riots, and I worked the Stonewall before the riots in 1968. So it was illegal to be gay, and so we would come out here to Fire Island to meet other gay people and everything, because we used to meet in the streets in Manhattan, and 3 or 4 people would be congregating on a corner talking, friends, and we'd be arrested and brought to jail for homosexual, we couldn't congregate on a corner.
The oppression against the gay community, the lesbian and gay community, was so severe that you couldn't tell your family, you couldn't tell your job, you had to be constantly closeted. So the importance of Cherry Grove was that it was a safe haven where people could come and be gay, hold hands with your boyfriend and hang out with other homosexuals, as they called us. And I think in that it helped to create a community that didn't necessarily exist in the city, for instance. I mean, the major communities were either private, upper-class communities or the bars. You know, there was always a network of gay bars, usually owned by the mafia back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s. And that's all there was.
It was a very different world back then in the gay world. You know, we were still hiding. I was still jumping out of bathroom windows from gay clubs that were being raided. So the fact that this existed literally 55 miles out of New York City seemed like paradise.
Maggie and I always palled around with much older people, you know, and they just welcomed us. As I said, Natalia brought me up. She was 35 years older than I, a very good friend. I met Janet Flanner through her and a lot of the literary groups. Maggie and I gave a party when our house was finished. Natalia Denese Murray called us and said, darling, I'm not going to be here. I'm in Rome, but someone is renting my house and I want you to go over and invite him to your party. And I said, who's that? And she said, Tennessee Williams. I said, oh my God, how wonderful. Went over the night of the party and said, Mr. Williams, would you like to come to our party? And it's our first night. I would love to, and please call me T. He was the first one to show up and the last one to leave. During the evening, people would come over and say, is that who I think it is? And I'd say, who do you think it is? Tennessee Williams. And I'd say, well, just keep it quiet.
There was a tremendous emphasis on home parties, house parties, theme parties.
Well, when I first came here, there was huge costume parties. And in fact, our house, there were no trees at the time, it was just sand. And they once had a party, and they had a rope going from Belvedere into our yard, and some queen came as Peter Pan, but she got stuck in the middle for about an hour, screaming. Someone arrived in a barge shaped like a swan pulled by 8 muscle men. They were really very elaborate. There was an MGM party, people would come as their favorite star. One person I remember coming, being carried into a litter and had dry ice underneath, so there was smoke rising.
I saw Sarah Vaughan here at the Club Atlantique, which is Sandpiper. I saw Della Reese was at the hotel.
We always went on Friday and Saturday evenings to the Monster, and we'd stand around outside. There were wicker chairs and couches on the side. We called it Wicker Row, and we'd sit there. And there'd probably be like 30 or 40 of us standing around outside. There was one guy there that we called Popper Bill. And if he opened his vest, you talked to him, he had all these little pockets in it with all these amyl nitrate and poppers and things there that you just bought off him there on the spot. And it was like wide open.
How important do you think Cherry Grove was to sexual liberation and the LGBT movement in general?
Well, I think it was very important in terms of sexual liberation, but it was absolutely missing from the gay rights movement.
Well, certainly Cherry Grove was gay liberation before it happened in the city. There's no question about that. People came out here from the city when they were living a very confined gay life in the city, and you came here and you were able to be gay or lesbian on the walks, and you felt a kind of wonderful relief from social pressures you might be feeling at your job or in any other part of your life in the city.
I suspect the Mattachine Society and the people who were active in that type of movement, and of course Stonewall was what led to gay liberation more than Cherry Grove.
I personally found the residents of Cherry Grove wanted nothing to do with the LGBT movement back in the 70s and 80s. They wanted to be complacent in their little gay haven. So I personally found it as a youth, gay youth back then, that it was a challenge getting people involved into the movement or wanting to do anything. Even with the AIDS crisis, they just wanted this to be the perfect little haven. I think many famous people stayed here and visited here, Gilbert and Larry Kramer and different people, but as a community, I think that individually people participated, but as a community it did not.
We were sitting on our deck and saying, why are gay people upset? Everything's fine. And not realizing that, in a way, we were in our little ghetto.
I think it was very important. And I was then involved with SAGE. I was one of the people who founded the women's dances. And the freedom that we had that night, the very first dance, and all of it together, Stonewall, and then the march in Washington, for women was very important.
I had read about Fire Island in a book when I was in middle school or high school. The book was called Rainbow Boys, and it was all about gay men on the East Coast, and they talked about going to an island where everyone was gay, and I was like, this doesn't exist. When I first came to Cherry Grove, I slept on the beach in a tent. I was 16, and I lived at the hotel when I started working here.
I had a girlfriend in high school who came with her family once to look at the drag queens. And she told me a story on the phone once, like saying there's men there who dress like women, and everybody gets really drunk and they have sex with each other. I remember her telling me the really long story on the phone and me thinking, how am I gonna respond to this without giving myself away?
There was something to me about Fire Island that I had this kind of preconception that it was a little played out. It was a little kind of like passé and something from a previous generation.
I first came to Cherry Grove as a visitor. I was staying in the Pines and I wandered down to Cherry Grove and gave it just the once over. It just seemed like a bunch of, fat queens and dashikis and Judy Garland music and a lot of drunk people, and it looked kind of tawdry. Over time, I began to understand that it was the people in Cherry Grove that ultimately won me over.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now in the beautiful backyard palatial gardens of Que Sera Sera.
Every house had a name back in the day.
Bangkok.
Bottoms up.
Spank you very much.
My house now is called Bella's Passion. Before it was called the Cuckoo's Nest.
Something in the Wolf. Dennis and the Wolf.
My name, Maze Bush.
Fairy view, because you can see the fairies from the house.
Well, my house is called Roseland because of my persona out here, Rose Levine. And I've been Rose Levine since I arrived here in Cherry Grove. So when I bought a house, I put a sign up Roseland, and it's still Roseland.
We had a home called the Valley of the Pods, which that was because everyone in the household joined AA. And at 6 o'clock at that time, everybody slowly left the beach and left their homes and kind of wandered like that movie Valley of the Pods.
The one Judy and I live in is called Happiness Is. The little one around the corner that was an outhouse back in the 1800s before they barged it over here is called Small Comfort. It is small.
Other names, Boys in the Attic, Above and Beyond.
White Swallow, which they made them change. Lickety Split, which they made them change.
Who made them change it?
The community. They said, ease it up a little bit.
I see people stopping in front of Pride House and they're taking pictures. I heard some people say, this is the house that was named after the Gay Pride Day. And I stopped and I said, no, it's not. I said, it was Pride House and Prejudice House, and Prejudice House is the one down at the foot of the dune right next door.
Oh, Hansel and Gretel. Roman Holiday always had a big crowd and nice people. You see, years ago, a lot of people stayed in groups and kept coming back every year. So everybody became friendly and family, so you got to know who was who and what was what.
Some old timers have come up to me and says, I remember this wonderful party, this wonderful orgy, if you will, that happened in this house, my house. I guess before it was named Olay, where there was this leather group and this black room, and it was called La Maison du Pain.
Well, if I sell my house, I'm taking my sign down. Years ago, I was very friendly with a hairdresser who had a long braid in the back of his hair, and he wore a hat, and he had an accent. I cannot ever reveal his name today because he wanted to sue me, because I told the story on stage using his name. So I could tell the story because it's my story, but I can't use his real name, so I just refer to him as Asshole. So the asshole came to me on the beach and said, darling, I'm having a dinner party and I'd love you to come. And he used to always walk around with this little cappuccino monkey that was this big. It was beautiful and I loved it. And he used to always come sit on my shoulder. I used to pet it. I never had a problem with this friggin' monkey. Can I curse here and there? Of course. Okay. So he invites me as Bella to go to his house. All right, Mary, I can't eat that much when I'm dressed as Bella. You know what I mean? I wanted to enjoy myself. So I go to his house. And I had been to his house other times for a pool party, but this was a special dinner. A big party, I should say. And he told me who was going to be there. Liza Minnelli, Claudia Colbert, and this one and that one. I said to myself, he's so full of fucking shit. I know that he does hair to famous people, but I had to go. And sure enough, all these people were there. Liza Minnelli, Claudia Colbert, the writer of some big movie, whatever it was, whatever he said, and the food was delicious, and the shrimps were this big. So after I made a pig of myself eating all the shrimps, I had to go fix myself up because Bella was coming apart. So I went upstairs to his bathroom. And I started to fix myself. And all of a sudden, I looked down, and what do I see on the side of the bed, out of the bathroom, was this cage with a blanket. It was the worst thing I ever did in my life, to take off the blanket. I took the blanket off. And when I took the blanket off, I see the little, as sweet as could be. I went, oh. And he remembered me. So I opened up the door, and he just jumped into my arms. And this monkey was just delicious. All right, Mary, enough is enough. I had this monkey in my arm 15 minutes at least. I go to put it in the cage, and it doesn't want to get off. So I says, come on. I go to put it in the cage, and I go to slam the door on it, and the monkey held on to the door and the cage, and within 1 second became a vicious bastard because he opened his mouth, and I saw these teeth that I never saw before. Oh, I jumped back. I said, what the fuck am I gonna do now? And I go to pick it up, and it jumps up in the air, and it lands on my head. Into the wig, the nails were, and I couldn't get them out of my hair. I couldn't do it. I didn't know what to do. I was starting to freak out now. I was on my hands and knees, and I said, this is how it has to be. I took him, still on my head, and I threw him forward so he would land on the bed. He landed on the bed, broke away from me and the wig. You had to see the wig when it was done. It was horrible. And I threw him in the cage. When he went, again, I said, fuck you. And I slammed the door, and his arm went limp. And I seen him crying and holding the arm. I said, oh, dear God in heaven. I covered him. I fixed the Bella up beautiful all over again. I went downstairs, and I said, I'm leaving now. I have to go. He goes, oh, Bella, no, we're having this, we're having that. I said, well, maybe I'll stay a couple of more shrimp. I'm on the beach the next day with my Bain de Soleil number 4, and I'm tanning my whole body, and all of a sudden, I see asshole walking with his monkey in his arm. And I put my head down, and maybe I was sleeping, but I'm looking out with the little corner of my eye, and I see the asshole, the monkey, and the monkey had a sling. I said, oh, dear Jesus, oh, dear Jesus. Bella. I says, oh, hi, yes. Look what happened. Do you know anybody went upstairs in my room last night? I said, I did to fix myself up, but I didn't hear nothing strange. I said, why, where was the baby? Right there. Oh, I didn't even notice. Right there. Oh, really? No, the monkey's arm. And I said, oh, that's a shame. All of a sudden, somebody that I didn't know, must have been a big shock, calls this asshole's name, and he gets excited to see them. I had to think it was something to do with California or whatever show he was going to do. He turns around, and he says, here, Bella, and throws the monkey in my arms. The monkey looked at me, and I looked at the monkey, and I knew the monkey remembered me. Well, I got the biggest freaking out all over me. She grabs the monkey back and says, you broke my monkey's arm. And I never saw her again.
At one time, this was in the 60s, you had to show that you were staying with somebody here in Cherry Grove before they'd let you off the boat. They just wouldn't let anybody off the ferry. Part of the thing was trying to protect the community. The reason why they were doing this was to prevent the Sayville types from coming over and beating up the gay guys. Guys used to come by on motorcycles and in automobiles and scream out fucking faggots and stuff like that at the train station.
Drag queens used to have to hide their clothes underneath the boards of the houses in order to, because it was illegal to dress like a woman.
Have you ever heard any horror stories about Cherry Grove?
Horror stories, yeah. Some guy was murdered on Doctor's Walk.
Why?
In Limerick. Do you know the house Limerick? Rough sex. He was a piano player in The Monster. And they were having rough sex, and the guy that he was, it's not funny, the guy that he was with stuck a sock down his throat, and he gagged to death.
And that's true.
But they never found out who it was.
And it's true.
Yes, it's a true story. What do you think, I make these things up?
When I was working at the Monster, there was this guy going around setting fire to houses. He would set a fire on one side of town, then go to the other side of town and set a fire under somebody else's house. And it had everybody in a total state of panic. A maid in the Ice Palace was cleaning his room and found flammable fluids under his bed. The police came and arrested him and quietly took him off the island early in the mornings before anybody could see who it was, because if they had, they probably would have lynched him.
Years ago, there was a young man who was robbing people, and he was finally caught and thoroughly kicked around by some of the local residents, and very glad to have the police come and take him away. The evildoers over here are meted a very strange justice.
Were you ever worried about getting in trouble in Cherry Grove?
No. Just once they was said that they were doing a thing on the boat, checking everybody's bags for drugs and marijuana. So yeah, they didn't have sniffing dogs at the time. So I put my little wig on my head and I stuck the ounce to my wig inside, and I just looked like I had a bubble hairdo. What can I tell you?
There was an author out here one time, and he was going to write a novel about murder in the meat rack. And we all went crazy. Don't you ever do that, because they'll give some nut the idea to do it.
Do you remember people being arrested in the meat rack?
Oh, yes, I remember people being arrested. 3 guys that lived with us.
In 1965, I had a guest, and I was doing a show, and he was supposed to meet me at 2 o'clock in the morning after the rehearsal. That's how we used to rehearse here. I'm waiting and waiting. I go home. Anyway, he never showed up. The next morning, since we never had telephones at that time in the house, I got a telephone call from the telephone booth downtown, and he was in jail on the mainland. He went out last night and he did a little cruising, I guess, and there were plainclothes policemen, and he might have touched him. Boom, he was arrested. I had to send $1,000 over to the mainland to bail him out. It was terrible.
During the 60s, there were raids by the Suffolk County Police Department. It was something that happened with some regularity. In those days, the meat rack was all the way up to Maryland Walk.
When we found out there was going to be a raid, we just was upset, and why don't they just leave us alone? You know, we don't do it in front of them, but they have come on our territory now.
Were you ever worried about getting in trouble in Cherry Grove?
Yeah, I was, and in a way, this doesn't, I don't think, speak very well for me. The danger of the meat rack was one of the things that attracted me to it.
Frankie McNamara. He was a queen that lived out here. He's since passed, and I was very friendly with him, and he was 10 years older than me. There were times when people would go to the rack. That was the known place, of course. And one time they came, all the cops, not the rangers, the cops, with flashlights and floodlights and whatever, and started to grab the people and handcuff them. Half naked, half undressed, whatever it was. Frankie was naked in the rack, completely bare-ass naked. I know, I thought, a girl, you have no sense. And she laid under the walk that leads you into the rack. Under that, she was completely naked in the water, hanging out. Then she floated herself out to the bay and floated herself down to Aon Walk, and she saved herself.
It was very disheartening to see these poor boys sitting on the dock at 7:30 in the morning, waiting for the police boat in handcuffs. They would do it on purpose, so people would see them.
They used to take you downtown, chain you to the post, the telephone pole, and arrest you, but they humiliated you. That was humiliation. And then the next day in the newspaper, they would write a whole article about who got caught in the rack. Your name, your address, your telephone number. That was real discrimination.
I was out in the rack, and all of a sudden, headlights in a row off of the beach just went on. There were 2, 4, 6, 8 headlights just went on. I knew it was a raid, and I could just see my career going up in smoke if I got caught. And maybe it was my legal mind that went to work. I said, well, I know you can't go south because that's where the headlights are. And I didn't know whether the trucks, automobile, Jeeps, or what. All I knew that there were these headlights shining from the dunes into the wreck itself. I also thought that if this was this well prepared, that maybe there was somebody at each exit. There was a eastern exit that came into the Grove, and there was a western exit that exited into the Pines. So there might be a cop standing there at the exits to catch you as you try to get out. So that left only one direction to go, and that was north, and the only thing north was the bay. So I headed for the bay, grabbed a couple of reeds, broke them off and got into the bay and sat down on the muck and mud of the bay with the reeds, and I sat there until the sun came up. I did not get arrested. So I don't know who did that day, but I never did, thank God.
I remember one morning in August, this friend of ours knocking on the door, very excited, couldn't get his words out. And he kept stuttering, and we kept, say something, what is it? And he said, the meat rack was raided last night, and Marilyn Monroe died.
When I first came, there were still a lot of the old-timers that had gone through that. And what struck me was that they could talk about it with humor. There was one that I knew him because he was the lover of a good friend of mine. Years later, I heard the story that they had met by taking refuge under the basement of a house due to the raid of the meat rack.
The guy who ran the Sea Shack kept a box of money that whenever somebody was arrested, he had his lawyer in Sayville go and bail them out.
There was a wonderful straight couple out here, Jim and Marie Fallon. Marie came out when she was 2 years old in Cherry Grove, and she died at 92. So for 90 years she came out here. Jim was a lawyer in Sayville, and he represented the gay men who were arrested.
Thank God for some of the locals that would go to bat for them and bail them out. But of course, by that time, the newspaper had your name.
Ed McCarthy mainly, he took care of a couple of people and got them out of jail. And Jim Fallon, and these were straight men, they were not gay, and they were protecting, as they said, that we're protecting the boys.
Tell me a little bit about the invasion.
The invasion. Well, the invasion started in 1976. It started, there was a drag queen named Terry Warren, who was an icon out here. She was a great performer in the bars and in the theater here. And she went to the Pines for dinner one night, and John White, she went to the Blue Whale, and John White asked his maitre d' to ask her to leave because it was a family restaurant. And they wouldn't allow her in because she was in drag. Terry more or less lived in drag. Even when he wasn't in drag, he looked like he was in drag. And he came back, and it enhanced the rift between the two communities. I mean, people always looked at us like the Pines was the Upper East Side and the Grove was the West Village. And there was always that competition that went on. And I think that sort of enhanced the feeling of distrust and dislike between the two communities. I mean, it just inflamed it. On July 4th, we were having a party and the subject came up. And I remember we were watching television, and it was during the bicentennial, and they had a massive flotilla going up and down the Hudson River. It was spectacular. And the conversation went on about John White and what he did and how disgraceful it was, and how could someone in a gay community be so closeted and closed-minded? How could he do that to his own? How could anyone do that to their own? And it just sort of inflamed everybody. And I don't know who said it, but someone said, well, we should go and show them, and why don't we have a flotilla of our own in our bay? And it just went on and on. So we all decided to have a little panzemonium, as we called it. When I was homecoming queen, I used to decide to do something, and I would call everybody up and say, we're all meeting at the pool, and we're all going to be Esther Williams today, or we're all going to meet in the meat rack, and we're going to have lunch. So we used to have a lot of these events. So now this was to become an event, and we all got on the phone and said, we're going to invade the Pines, everyone has to be in drag, meet so-and-so at the dock, we'll order the water taxi. So it was sort of an event, and everybody dressed in drag, and there was a small number of us. And we went to invade, to show how dare you do this to one of our own. And we had no idea what to expect, but we went, and it was very well received. It was rather an exciting happening. And we just decided to do it every year, and now it's grown to what it is.
Terry Warren and Susie, they were the only ones that Jimmy Murray let go in drag. Her and Susie did drag shows out here before the rest of them did it. I mean, they always had the ball and everything. Terry died 25 years ago.
Before the Pines had the pavilion and dancing before that, everybody came to Cherry Grove to the Ice Palace and danced. They all came from the Pines. And so liquor was turned off at 4 o'clock, but everybody stayed and continued dancing until dawn. Sometimes, I mean, myself, you run down to the ocean, throw yourself in the ocean, come back. A good number of us were on minor drug kind of things. You had the energy to keep going. And in the mornings, I remember walking out to the beach, and here it seemed like 500 guys walking back to the Pines. The sun was coming up. They all kind of glowed. It was marvelous.
It hit here like a nuclear bomb.
Whole houses were wiped out.
When we come out on a Friday night from working in the city, we'd hear Joe died, Al died, Steve died. 5 or 6 of our friends had died that week. Any of us were vulnerable.
We used to keep track of the people we knew who died of AIDS, and we stopped counting when we reached 100.
I think it devastated the community. It was such an eye-opener to so many people at early times to start seeing everybody change. I mean, people were changing physically, and it was such a visual. I mean, if you lived in New Rochelle or Jersey City or something and read about the AIDS epidemic, it might not have affected you so much. But out here, you saw your neighbors losing 100 pounds or getting Kaposi sarcoma on their face, and I think it was devastating. People didn't know what to do or how to handle it.
People felt that if you got off the boat, you were going to get AIDS.
There were definitely people running around here scared.
A lot of people at the time looked the other way, especially at the beginning of the epidemic. We didn't know what caused it. It was then later on established to be bloodborne, and there are a lot of people that thought that maybe mosquitoes would carry it.
We invited some straight relatives out here, and they came home thinking it was sort of a leper's colony. They saw people very, very sick.
The fact that I'm 87, I'm damn glad to be here, because there are an awful lot of my contemporaries who didn't make it, I can assure you. I could go right down Lewis Walk practically, and I'm sure I could give you half a dozen names of people who have died.
My friend Paul, he was in the house for around people. We were in the house for a long time, Bella and I and the bunch. My friend Joey Vaughn, Al Jean, and all Jackie Morrell, many. Man, I could go on.
The guys I spent so much time with, they were good friends, and it was heartbreaking when they died.
Boys started dying. All the men who owned homes started to die off. Women were making a lot more money in their jobs.
And there was a slogan at the time, men die and the women buy.
Women started to have the kinds of jobs where they made the money to be able to come out here, and there was more opportunity to do that because of the demographic changing.
There was a real time when this town was torn. Gay men were dying of AIDS and lesbians were moving in.
I remember the memorial service, the listing of people, 60 names long that have passed along.
2 pages of names for the memorial service every year. 2 pages. Lost a lot of friends. And all I kept saying was, It is not fair to die from sex. That's a ridiculous reason to die.
Oh, I think it put us through a protracted mourning period and a period of cohesiveness, of coming together. We discovered a sense of responsibility and caring for each other that we were less aware of prior.
Well, hello, buddies. Welcome to our beautiful island. Today is your day. Please use our island. Use us. We can't say no. Have a great time. We love you. Thank you.
I think we, out here more than in the city, found a lot of compassion for AIDS and HIV people. I don't know why that is, but that's how I found it. I know on the invasion, for instance, people who were ill felt very free to come and participate in the invasion. It was a free day to have fun. And I know in the city, people often didn't go to public events because they were so self-conscious. But I think out here on the island, we all loved each other so much that there was a certain freedom about the experience.
The thing I love about the meat rack is that I've heard from other residents here is that so many people who passed away had their ashes spread there. And that to me just speaks volumes. Like that is the final place that they wanted to be.
I probably was lucky because I did have a long-term relationship, and that's probably why I'm alive today.
Has the meat rack changed over the years?
Yes, it has. Well, I haven't been there lately, to be perfectly honest, but so I don't know how much it's changed, but I remember in the 70s it was packed on both sides of, Cherry Grove and the Pines in a very active place, and I think the activity lessened over the years. I don't think it is what it was, but it's still there.
People are still joking about the meat rack. There's 5 people out there. There's 20 people. It's not like in its heyday of gloriousness, I thought.
I mean, it used to be a complete free-for-all in the best possible way. And I think, that was probably tempered a bit with the AIDS crisis.
My fear is that the internet has made the meat rack obsolete.
It has changed over the years, and I feel like with Grindr and Scruff and all of the gay apps, no one really needs to go out and see each other anymore, and it's all just social media interaction, and they police it now.
What do you think about people not being able to lay naked on the beach or them writing tickets in the meat rack?
It's not the free island that we had.
There's a lot less freedom allowed here in Cherry Grove in certain ways. I find that any of the freedoms that used to be enjoyed for free, you can still enjoy, but they're mostly in venues like the bars and restaurants in towns have nights where you're allowed to take off your clothes and have sex on stage and do whatever you want, as long as you pay the cover or you're participating in somebody making money off of it. I find that there are much less opportunities to do that in the traditional places that was done in Cherry Grove, like the meat rack or even on the beach.
If nudity upsets you, you shouldn't come to Fire Island. This is our place to be free, and that includes taking our clothes off if we feel like it.
Recently, it seems there has been a kind of heightened enforcement of regulations about nudity, about loitering in the meat rack, and it seems like very, on the surface, it seems a little homophobic.
because you're going right back the way things were, what, 50 years ago.
The more that we as gay people become assimilated into the rest of the population, the more the subversive or the underground or the things that we did that straight people object to and still object to will be cracked down on.
I don't consider the meat rack public. That's the way I look at it. It's like, I knew about that from, like this first season I was here, and we didn't go there. It was that simple.
Governments and governmental agencies love to exercise their authority. It's the only reason sometimes that they feel like they're in existence.
Why don't they go find some of these terrorists instead of bothering us? I think the terrorists are doing more harm than having sex.
I do wonder, what is the trade-off that we have now that we are so much more accepted, that we can get married in every state? There used to be a kind of renegade quality to being queer. And as that lessens, I feel like those kind of liberties that we can take might get diminished.
Do you think that Cherry Grove is as important now as it was in the 50s?
To me, it's very important. I survived it here through all the years. I felt that I was accepted in this community of Cherry Grove, and this is where I live. I may not live here 12 months out of the year, but for the 6.5 months I'm here, this is my home, these are my friends, and this is my community. I just love it here.
The biggest argument that you'll hear, or discussion that you always hear, is that gays can go anywhere in the world, so they don't need a destination. And I actually disagree. The reason I come here is because it's a community of my fellows.
Even though there is more widespread LGBT acceptance, it has been really powerful for me as a queer woman to be here and to all of a sudden be like, oh, even in New York City where I live, I don't feel as fully comfortable being out as I do here. When I'm out with my partner at dinner at a restaurant, even in the part of Brooklyn I live in, which is very progressive, there's still a layer of shame and a layer of that's so subtle and so deep, I don't even notice it until it's removed. And when I come here, it's sort of like in the negative. The absence of that makes me aware that it was there in the first place.
Now you can kind of be gay anywhere is what people think, but even you can't. In the streets of New York, you can't be gay. You get called a faggot and this and that everywhere.
You don't have to worry about the judgment quite as much, and I feel like that's always been the draw.
I think it still retains its tradition, its importance, simply because it reflects, I think, the entire history of the gay movement.
I've lived in New York most of my adult life, and I've seen neighborhoods gentrify and change and shift the value that they bring to a community. And I feel like that is happening here, but I don't think anyone knows what the next era will be for Cherry Grove. It might become a straight community, it seems to me.
Being the majority is a different kind of experience, and it's important, I think, that we have that experience. And I think it's important that we preserve and honor and build upon the culture and the roots that were laid down in the 1950s.
I really appreciate what the people did 50 years ago, you know, to maintain this for us. So I would just say, you know, like, keep it for the next set of kids.
I remember my parents telling me they walked to school barefoot. And I always think when I'm talking to young gay people, it's the same thing. You know, when I'm telling them what it was like when I was young. So I try to avoid saying something like that. Because in 50 years, it's going to be something completely different. And it's going to morph into something wonderful, but probably very different than we know it today.
One of my favorite things is like walking on the beach at night. I get to connect with nature, it's quiet, there's no one around. It's just like you and nature. So I feel like if I could never come back, the last thing I would want is like a night beach walk.
If I could never return to Cherry Grove, then I would die.
I don't know, maybe start writing little notes to myself, memoir.
Watch a sunset on the Great South Bay.
I would want to kiss the little chameleon that I have on the door there and wish it luck, wish the house luck.
I think have my ashes thrown in the bay. That would be it.
I would have to walk to the beach to see the ocean.
I would just look back and think of all the good times.
The best thing that I've ever gotten out of Cherry Grove is the relationships that I've formed with other people. So I think that that's how I would enjoy my last time here, is being with the people here.
Kiss my house goodbye. I don't know what it would be, because I hope that day never comes.
The last thing I would like to do in Cherry Grove, if I can't return, I keep singing. Keep writing my column. I'm not leaving. I feel a song coming on. It's a melody full of the laughter of children out after the rain. I hear a tuneful story ringing through ya, love and glory, hallelujah. And now that my troubles are gone, let those heavenly drums go on drumming, 'cause I feel a song coming on.